This week, it glimmers, it shimmers, and it's often the most exclusive club in town. We're talking about swimming pools. So grab your sunscreen and towel. We're taking a dive into the deep end of pools and how their history has contributed to a modern public health crisis. Hello and welcome to Health Wanted. From WABE and Emory University's Rollins School of Public Health, I'm Laurel Bristow. Each week we cover your need-to-know public health topics and break down the science behind them in our pursuit of better health. As always, if you have a question for us to answer in a future show, send me a message to healthwanted@wabe.org, or you can also call and leave me a voicemail at 404-888-3630. It's the end of summer, temperatures are sky high, and if you're anything like me, you've been texting every person you've ever met, even in passing, to try and get an invite to their pool. Much like me, America loves swimming.
Having fun!
We have by far the most Olympic medals in the sport of any country, nearly 3 times more than the second place country of Australia. We have over 10 million pools in the country, 97% of which are residential. That's roughly 1 for every 31 people. And yet, I've been swimming once so far. It's been a hard adjustment for me, someone who grew up with one of those 10 million private pools, who absolutely loved the chore of cleaning the filter and balancing the water chemistry. Which is why I know that the concept of a color-changing chemical that will immediately identify someone who has peed in the pool and bring shame upon them is a myth.
Are you making a sissy?
Invented to scare children and adults into appropriate hygiene. But you might be surprised to know there is actually a sort of alarm for when people are simply too content in the pool to leave that uses a sense other than sight. Now, this is one of those moments where I've been told by my production team I have to warn listeners that we're about to discuss bodily functions on a show about health. That classic chlorine smell that brings your memory back to weekend swim meets and sunburned scalps from putting your hair in tiny braids is actually a pretty good indication that more than a few people haven't been respecting the signs stating, "We do not swim in your toilet, so please do not pee in our pool." Your urine contains a lot of different elements, but uric acid and certain types of amino acids can have a particularly volatile interaction with chlorine, resulting in compounds like cyanogen chloride and trichloramine, 2 lung and eye irritants. How much of these chemicals you're faced with is a factor of how much peeing or sweating people are doing in the pool. Likely, if you wanted to get a lethal dose, it would take such a massive amount of both chlorine and would-be peers that the chemical burns from the disinfectant alone would likely force the swimmers out of the water before they had a chance to go. Still, the health risks of more realistic exposures, like indoor swim meets, particularly for people already suffering from asthma, have already been documented. In fact, one swimmer at a junior nationals meet had to be taken to the hospital after he suffered from difficulty breathing during the meet. His ailment was chalked up to excessive pee and sweat in the indoor pool, which created poor air quality for the athletes. The compounds formed by chlorine and bodily fluids are heavier than air, so they accumulate just above the water's surface, right where competitive swimmers take their breaths. Thankfully, we can essentially completely remove the risk of excess bodily compounds mixing with chlorine by rinsing off before swimming and not peeing in the pool. I know the prospect of getting out, drying off, making your way through the house or into the locker room, and removing a wet swimsuit is a lot to ask, but it beats unwittingly engaging in chemical warfare with your fellow bathers. If you've ever wondered about a different sign at public pools, namely the ones prohibiting people from swimming if they've had active diarrhea in the last 14 days, well, those are about cryptosporidium. Crypto is a parasitic infection that can cause diarrheal disease for up to 2 weeks. When someone has a more serious accident in a pool, at least I would hope it would be by accident, chlorine can eradicate threats from pathogens like E. coli and hepatitis A rather quickly, even at the standard levels of chlorination. If you've ever been politely asked by a teenager to exit the pool for 30 minutes, it's likely because a foreign substance has been noticed and they needed to up the chlorine concentration to really neutralize the threat. But if the pool is suddenly done for the day, it's because the problem was less solid. Crypto is extremely resilient. It can survive in regular chlorination for up to 10 days. And the surest way to get rid of it is to bump the chlorination up and drop the pH down for several hours. The idea of swimming in a toilet is objectively disgusting, at least when we think of it as a human toilet.
Ew.
If you're swimming in a natural body of water, other animals are certainly not abiding by any rules of civilized society. Then again, that's why many people are pools only when it comes to water recreation. But frankly, we're lucky that crypto is our greatest pathogen of concern. In the summers, it used to be the fear of polio that shuttered pools. Though the disease had been in the US since the 1890s, the peak of the epidemic hit in the 1940s and 50s, with spikes in the summertime. It wasn't entirely clear why the disease had such seasonality. It still isn't. So naturally, everything associated with summer was under scrutiny as a possible spreader of polio. Flies, mosquitoes, sunshine, heat, exercise, even soda pop, and particularly pools. While polio can be spread through ingesting contaminated water, the fears around pools were more of a suspicion than a known risk, and kids were often made to suffer the sweaty summers on dry land. In 1946, the University of Michigan metaphorically reopened the pools after publishing a paper that showed low levels of chlorine were enough to inactivate the virus. Fears were further calmed by additional papers that showed swimming pools, as well as milk or the general water supply, were unlikely to be the source of polio spread. The true culprit for transmission remained a mystery, but at least kids could go back to playing Marco Polo.
Yay!
Prior to their villainization, pools had also been viewed as a potential cure for polio. Nearly a decade before Franklin Roosevelt would become president, he was seeking a cure for the infection that had paralyzed him from the chest down at age 39. His investigation brought him to Warm Springs, Georgia, where swimming in a pool fed by natural hot springs gave him enough buoyancy to allow him to stand on his own and move his right leg for the first time in 3 years, while still in the water, of course. It was part of the development of the practice of physical therapy. These days, the greatest risk that pools really pose is that of drowning. Each year, about 4,000 people die as a result of drowning. That's an average of 11 people a day. It's a public health crisis that can be tied directly to the history of pools. The origin of the summer pool is based less in recreation and more in practicality. They were essentially giant bathtubs for poor and immigrant neighborhoods to use after the workday ended. While many wealthier Americans had access to indoor plumbing by the end of the 19th century, the great unwashed masses did not, and the rich were hardly going to suffer the smell. The solution was to build communal bathing pools, segregated by gender. Eventually, as indoor plumbing became more commonplace, even for middle classes and lower, the bathhouse fell out of fashion and need and was eventually closed, which left pools for recreation. The swimming craze was further helped along by the New Deal-sponsored construction and renovation of hundreds of pools as part of the plan to pull America out of the Great Depression. After all, who could be sad in a pool? By 1933, going swimming was as popular as going to the movies. As these pools were no longer about the intimate act of bathing, they generally stopped being segregated by gender, but started being segregated by race. The reasoning was the long-standing racist idea that white women, scantily clad in their bathing costumes, needed to be protected from black men. And the separation was often enforced through extreme violence, with white patrons putting nails and glass in pools or dumping acid into water to prevent black swimmers. With the ruling on Brown versus the Board of Education and the Civil Rights Act, public pools could no longer be legally segregated, and everything was fixed forever. Just kidding. Instead of simply being normal and sharing facilities with all residents, many formerly white pools pulled the ultimate "I'm taking my ball and going home" and decided they'd rather drain the pools than share. People fought the practice all the way to the Supreme Court with the case Palmer versus Thompson, a lawsuit brought by black citizens of Jackson, Mississippi, after the city decided to close 4 public pools and lease the 5th to the then private and whites-only YMCA. Unsurprisingly, the court justices sided with the anti-integration sentiments, saying the practice was not discriminatory because it hurt citizens of all races equally. Not exactly the kind of equality we were going for. And also, not even true. The closing of pools as a result of desegregation saw a huge surge in backyard pool construction and the opening of private swim clubs. White people were paying for the privilege of resegregating. And Atlanta was no better. It might surprise you to learn that Grant Park once contained a 6-acre lake called Lake Abana that housed an area for public swimming. In the 1960s, rather than integrate the area, the lake was drained and paved to make a parking lot for the new zoo. Combine this with the trend of white flight out of urban areas, and the public pools that were left began to fall into disrepair, lacking the political will and property tax to maintain them. East Point lost their public pools in 1983 when a bond referendum to cover the cost of repairs failed to pass. Remember how I said there was roughly one pool for every 31 people in the country? Well, that's only if you include private pools. If we're just talking public pools, there's one pool for every 38,000 people. For those that can't afford access to private pools, the consequences are dire. Nearly 80% of children in families with household incomes of less than $50,000 have little to no swimming abilities. Drowning is the third leading cause of accidental death by injury in Americans under the age of 24. It's the number one cause of death in kids aged 1 to 4. Younger Black adolescents are nearly 3 times as likely to drown as their white peers. It's the result of generations of families being denied the opportunity to swim. Children are significantly less likely to learn to swim if their parents can't swim. And 26% of Black parents and 34% of Latino parents report never learning to swim, compared to just 4% of white parents. Pools are the safest place for people to learn to swim. They are well attended, often have lifeguards, and clear water lets others see when someone goes under. But as global temperatures continue to increase, people who don't have access to pools will likely seek relief in other bodies of water, like rivers or lakes, with less visibility, unseen hazards, and currents that can be a problem for weak swimmers. I'm Laurel Bristow for Health Wanted.